Welcome, everyone, to our Octane 21 Executive Summit. It's one of my favorite parts of Octane, and my favorite part of this Executive Summit is this conversation I'm lucky enough to have with the President and the CEO of ServiceNow, Mr. Bill McDermott. Bill has been the President and CEO of ServiceNow since what feels like about 36 years ago, because it was November of 2019, just before the pandemic. Before that, he worked at SAP, where he was the CEO there. He's worked at Siebel, he's worked at Gartner, he's worked at Xerox. Has a great career so far, and doing amazing things at ServiceNow. So, welcome to Executive Summit, Bill.
Todd, thank you very much for having me.
Leading, leadership, it's on everyone's mind. Everyone wants to be an effective leader, be able to move their organizations forward. As you joined ServiceNow over the last year and a half, how has your approach to leadership and your purposeful leadership evolved, especially given the mission of ServiceNow and the interplay between the company leadership and your personal leadership?
Well, I always felt that leadership was the art of developing followership. And, as you mentioned, I've been with ServiceNow like a year and a half. And the first 100 days I came on board, I conducted what I called a Dream Big tour. And that was really a tour around the entire world to meet all of our biggest customers and then all of our colleagues, 13,000 strong. And it worked out well because, as you said, shortly thereafter, the pandemic really hit. And, trust is the ultimate human currency. And without trust, it's really hard to build great teams. So I tried to bring a dream big mentality to ServiceNow. In my book, Winner's Dream, my favorite quote as I started off the book was Robert Kennedy, some men see things as they are and say why. I dream things that never were and say why not. And, as you said, it's all about purpose led teams and purpose led organizations. And ours is pretty straightforward. We make the world of work better for people.
How much of the last year I've noticed that some of the leadership over the last year has been tried and true, perennial type of leadership. But some of it's changed. I feel like the pandemic and what happened with social justice and the racial issues we've had have really changed the conversation. How do you think about the interplay between the perennial leadership values and maybe what's different the past year?
Yeah, I mean, anything worth communicating is almost always under communicated. And if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that you need to over communicate everything and really be in front of your colleagues, especially considering, the distance is pretty daunting after a while. So we've tried to really double down on empathy and really communicate, whether it's in large settings where we'll do global Zooms or breaking it out in teams and really staying close to our associates. For example, you brought up the racial injustice that does exist in the world. And, we had to take a very active stand. And it was very important to really listen and learn and not pretend like you have all the answers. On the contrary, we had more questions than we had answers, but we were willing to listen. And the stories, when you listen, are really overwhelming. I'll never forget one story one of our colleagues told me that really affected me big time. She moved with her family from Chicago when she was 7 years old to a place in Florida. And this place in Florida had a little house that they bought. And one of the neighbors actually took a petition to try to keep them off the block because they're an African American family. And you could just imagine how that struck the family. Well, lo and behold, they did get into that house, but the person that was leading the parade against them moving into that house was her school teacher. So you hear stories like that, and everything just becomes so palpable, so real, so human. And what we try to do is lean into these things and really make a difference. We put up $100 million fund for a company our size. It's pretty large, to invest in Black communities, especially get behind African American owned businesses, providing housing loans, and really kind of putting our money where our mouth is. We always believed in doing the right thing. That's a long-standing culture of ServiceNow, but you had to get much more active this time around. And that includes rethinking things like recruiting, rethinking training, because you want to make sure the folks that you already have a great pathway to success, making sure the pay is fair, lobbying for good, and then obviously reporting out and measuring progress, not because you're trying to give yourself a pat on the back. On the contrary, the challenge is so large, you have to report out on it to keep everybody focused and keep pushing forward to get it right. So those are some of the things that I believe strongly made a difference for our company in the crisis.
Yeah, it's so insightful and interesting to hear, especially your point about communication and constantly communicating. I've noticed that as the pressure heats up with craziness in the world and so many uncertainties in the world, it kind of makes that communication harder because people aren't as, they're kind of not clear what everyone else is doing and they're not sure if they're on the right track. So it just underscores that further need to communicate constantly. It's a very good point.
Yeah, you have to have a heart. I mean, that's all part of it too, right? You have to be vulnerable. You have to be honest. You have to have a heart. People want the real deal. They're tired of the PowerPoint stories. They want authentic leadership. They want to understand that you understand them. And I really kind of made that my mission throughout my professional career. But as you rightfully pointed out, it's never been more important than it is now. We have customers of ours using the Now platform that are literally hiring thousands of people they've never even met. They onboard them. Here's your phone, here's your computer, here's your training materials, personalized for you, of course, and then access to all your services. But never met them. And just think about being a new person coming into a company. We hired several thousand we never physically met, and how they're feeling. Think about it. It's like they never got emotionally attached to that human factor to begin with. So you really have to, reach out and make sure you give them a good digital bear hug so they know you care.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And you're famous for being constantly in contact with customers. You mentioned your world tour and meeting all of your team members, but also I'm sure you talk to many, many, many customers. What are you seeing in terms of, I mean, a lot of these trends we're talking about, digital transformation, more cloud apps and things like that have been going on for many years and will continue to go on for years. How has it changed during COVID? You mentioned one example. What other example are you seeing out there from customers that's interesting?
Well, right now, the big thing on customers' minds that I'm dealing with daily, and incidentally, I talked to my chief of staff just the other day, and I said, look, we're pretty busy. How many customers have I been in touch with since the beginning of the year? And the count was over 800. And we're operating with C-level executives. So, most of that is CEOs of corporations, or certainly the top CIOs and CTOs in the world. So that's a lot of people, and we're keeping busy. And
Bill, it's only March.
I
How did you
know,
do that?
I know. Well, one of the big things is this technology we're on right now, Todd. You can obviously meet through these digital communication channels many, many more executives than you ever could going in and out of airports. So the COVID crisis has taught us a lot about using modern technology to have a far more productive relationship plan with your customers. And our customers are saying three big things, Todd. Number one, digital transformation is clearly the opportunity of this generation, and that is absolutely factual. There's been $3 trillion poured into digital transformation in the last few years. And yet, of all that money spent, only 25% of those projects actually have a positive ROI. And the big reason for that is the lack of integration. So we try to solve that puzzle for the customer with the Now platform. The second big thing is cloud computing. It's obviously going to be a multi-cloud world. We bring a significant platform to that equation, but our customers are navigating between their own data center, which platforms in the SaaS world or the platform world will we team up with, and including the infrastructure world, so they can build the next generation company. And then the third thing that's really big that we spend a lot of time on, and I personally spend a lot of time on, is business model innovation. The reality is, for all of the techies out there, the customer is hiring your technology to do a job. It's just that simple. Now, in the next 3 years, the customer is going to have to get 25% of their new revenue from businesses they are not in right now. So they will be very interested in working with partners and companies that can see around corners. They really understand their industry. They understand the persona within their establishment very well. They can figure out what the CHRO needs versus the head of sales versus the CTO versus the CIO, and obviously versus the CEO. But it's really enabling new business models. For example, if you take a retailer today that might be serving coffee, and their big business is hosting you in their cafes, that business model has been turned on its head. And now everything is either virtual or it's drive-through. And you have to radically simplify that whole customer experience and create a net new business model. This, of course, comes at the same time where minimum wage is going to $15 an hour. So there's enormous pressure on these companies to figure out how they're going to gain revenue. They're going to treat their associates very well, and they're going to handle the shareholder value concern of margin compression based upon revenue algorithms tied to salary algorithms tied to ultimate profitability. So this is not just about your technology. This is about completely rethinking the value chain so the company can achieve great goals and ultimately create new models that take them into the future. You take a company like Disney. They had the theme park shut down. Nobody's going to cinema, but they built the digital bridge to the future with Disney Plus. Now they have the highest stock price of all time, not because they're making the most profit, but because the future is bright. And we're very proud to work with companies like that with machine learning, virtual agents, AI, all the predictive analytics that has to go into the workflow relationship with the company we serve and the customer they serve. Again, rethink it all, be all about cloud, be all about digital transformation, and remember, they're hiring the technology to do a job. You gotta innovate the business model.
Yeah, that's so well said. We often, and I'm guilty as I'm as guilty as this as anyone, think about it as a technology transition, but it's really only at the service of these business model transitions that are really what matters. It's such a great point you make there. One of the specific industries that is, transforming business models and technology models is healthcare and pharma. And I know that ServiceNow has been working on vaccine distribution, something on everyone's mind, and other problems in the healthcare space. What are you guys trying to solve there, and how are you approaching it?
Most importantly, Todd, we started out talking about leadership. And when you think about leadership, I really believe that the world's biggest problems are also its biggest opportunities. It was last March, on a Sunday, I was getting ready for a leadership offsite. I show up there on Monday, and we're right now, getting early news, early chatter on this whole COVID crisis. And I looked around the room and I said, look, this thing is going to be the biggest problem society is going to confront globally, maybe in the next decade. We have to lean in and help the world solve the COVID problem, because if we don't, there may not be a blue sky. So we literally ditched the slideshows and just focused on COVID. And in 1 week, we delivered emergency response applications to our customers across the world. In another month, we came out with the idea of returning to work safely, because at some point we knew that the office, like any other good tool, whether it's a computer or a smartphone. The office is a business tool, and it's important to have that tool. It's not important to obsess over it. It's important to have it as an option. And we knew that. So we needed to know, are people healthy, mentally and physically? Are they properly tested? Are the offices socially distanced enough to keep them safe? Are PPE inventory management philosophies being consistently deployed in all office locations around the world? And is there a pane of glass where the CEO or the CIO, as an example, can see with great visibility what's going on to keep people safe? The third thing was obviously once the vaccine hit, we're like, hey, you might have the vaccine, but you have to distribute it, you have to administer it, and then you have to monitor how it all goes with the patient once the vaccination has been administered. And we figured that would be a very important workflow challenge that would need to be solved. So now, if you look at countries like Scotland, 5.5 million citizens vaccinated on the Now platform. Germany, United States. We have many states like the great state of North Carolina, local municipalities, all of the pharma companies in one way or another working with us. And today we went over 101 major organizations, 101, that are live on this whole vaccine management, return to work safely, and all the protocols that I just talked about, live. What I try to do, along with the greatest engineering team I've ever worked with, is make sure that we are not a conversation. We are a delivery mechanism, and we do things with enormous speed. And I think that's the big differentiator between having an idea, having a product, and ultimately getting the customer to derive the value from it. You have to move really, really fast.
I love that. I love that. When you say conversation, you just basically mean talking about it, not doing anything.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
or I mean, or I mean, like I don't know about you, Todd, but if I see another PowerPoint, it's like I'll pass out. It's like, show me the product.
I
Let's
better not
look
show
at
you
the
my PowerPoint
technology.
now, Bill. I won't show you my PowerPoint.
Right. Your technology is fantastic. I mentioned earlier, I use it every day. It's on my smartphone. ServiceNow is a great customer because we know you have a great solution. But you have a great product. And, I always talk about the difference between the slideware and the product and the usage of the product. So we want people using the product, deriving the value from the product, and let the product stand on its own 2 feet. And if it's a strong product, it'll do great. And if it's not, it won't.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I think it's right on. You talked about a little bit in there was getting people back to work safely. So I was wondering, as you think about the 13,000 employees of ServiceNow around the world, everyone's been remote, right? We've kind of, for by hook or by crook, we've figured out how to be remote. As we get these vaccines out there and we go back to work at least partially, how are you thinking about the best ways to make that effective? Because when I think about it, this hybrid in between, not totally back or not totally remote is the hardest phase or the hardest new normal. How do you guys think about that?
Well, it absolutely is the hardest new normal. I mean, I think the first thing is this. By 2024, 75% of the workforce will be millennial generation employees or younger. From my experience, they had no interest in being stuffed in a bullpen before COVID. And after COVID, I know they're going to be less interested in being told that they have to punch the clock and be seen in the bullpen. What they want is they want choice. And they all know, for example, in the engineering realm, that they have to collaborate. They have to ideate. They have to team up with their colleagues to invent great software or make great products. There's no debate on that. But they also know that the soul crushing, boring corporate stuff that they used to have to do has now been disintermediated by technology. So what they want is they want us to respect them, to trust them, to do the right thing with their time, and to give them the best chance at being the most high productive performer they can possibly be. How do we make them the best performer they can possibly be? I constantly hear CEOs talking about how I'm going to get them back. You didn't lose them. They're still with you.
That's right.
What you want to do is make sure you focus on their performance and helping them win. So I believe that, the 5 days a week punch in the clock world is probably pretty far out into the future if it'll ever come back. I do believe that people want the office as an option and they need it as an option, but it's one of the tools in the bag. It's not going to be exactly what it used to be in the past. And you know something? When you really think about the future of work, we have to stop this linear thinking where it's going to be incrementally somewhat what it used to be, or we're going to get incrementally better than we used to be. No, no, no. This is time for exponential thinking. It's time to rethink the whole thing. It's time to reorient the productivity curve and get a huge hockey stick because we're smarter than we used to be.
Yeah, I love that. I love the orientation on winning. It's like don't map it to the past. What do you need to do to win? And that's a great way to orient it. And I think if we could do that, it's going to lead to much better outcomes. And like you said, not as much linear thinking. So it's
Exactly.
powerful.
Exactly. And the other thing, Todd, we didn't cover about this idea of exponential thinking and really leaning into the future of work is the employers that get the memo on this and that role model this properly will attract the best talent. And the ones that don't will have the talent walk right out the door and go someplace that got the memo. So we're in a new world. The power is in the hands of the people, and the best talent gets to work wherever it wants. So let's focus on winning. Let's focus on building championship teams, and let's not necessarily try to recreate what once existed because that's gone.
Yeah, well, Bill, I love the mindset. I love the thoughts are right on. I think it's what we all need, and it's super helpful to have you lay them out here for us at our executive summit. Thanks for being a great partner. Thanks for all the work you do at ServiceNow and in the industry, and thanks again for being at Executive Summit at Octane 21.
It was an honor, Todd, and thank you for a wonderful interview. I wish all the executives at this session the absolute very best. And thank you, Todd, for really leading a wonderful company and hosting me today. It meant a lot to me. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Make sure everyone tunes in for the rest of Executive Summit and overall Octane 21. We have a lot of great stuff for you to learn from and grow from, and hopefully help a little bit as you chart out the next weeks and months and years ahead. So thanks again.